Welcome to the first in a series of video casts from Newcastle Business School dealing with issues of employee reward. Now, the first of these video casts is intended to introduce the topic. What is reward? We're going to be talking about the various elements of reward systems and reward packages and focusing particularly on strategic questions. How do organisations decide the kinds of rewards that they should offer to employees? What are they seeking to achieve through the kinds of reward systems that they put in place? What can be achieved through reward systems? And what kinds of varieties in terms of reward strategies might there be? So this is the broad focus of the session here today. We're going to finish off with an overview of the course on employee reward as a whole, so you can see how it all fits together and how the various sessions and video casts that are going to be available fit together. But we're going to start out by introducing the topic by thinking about the varieties of forms of rewards that organisations have available to them, and this gives some indication of how the subject and the practice of reward has developed over the years. Now, previously, if we go back into the depths of time, we would see that organisations didn't used to talk about reward at all. They used to talk about pay. Pay was simple and it was straightforward. And we go back through the histories of management practice, particularly thinking about approaches like Taylorism, where pay was seen as a very simple form of transaction to link effort on the part of employees with certain outcomes, so that we could direct people's behaviour, we could direct people to do the things that we wanted them to do, the things that we thought would add value to our organisations. But pay was thought exclusively in this kind of transactional form. Now, you'll notice from the slide here that we've got these two categories suggested here: transactional returns, sometimes called total compensation, and relational returns. Now, what we're talking about here are returns on people's effort, returns for labour, and some of those will take the form of a kind of financial transaction. It's an effort reward bargain. Now, that might still be quite broad in terms of reward practices. It's not simple cash pay by any stretch of the imagination, but it does still focus on those broadly financial aspects, however complicated we might make them. The other category are different and a much newer innovation in terms of reward. Relational returns speak to other aspects of people's needs at work, the kinds of rewards that people might desire, and this might be things that are particularly appropriate in winning people's commitment to organisations, flexibility, those kinds of things. So, in the course that you're doing currently with us here, we're going to focus on these transactional returns. I will set out both the scope of transactional returns and relational returns, but over the course of the module, we will be focusing primarily on the transactional returns. But I wanted to set out the full scope of rewards so you can see how they all fit together. So, if we turn our attention to the transactional elements initially, two broad categories of transactional returns on people's effort that we might put into a reward package for people at work. Cash compensation on the one hand and benefits on the other. Now let's have a look at what these might entail. In terms of cash compensation, there are a range of things that we might typically associate with pay. So we start out with the most obvious and the most straightforward, the thing that we most readily think about in terms of rewards: base pay. The pay that we get for doing the job, our salary, our wages, the thing that we know that we're going to take home at the end of the week or at the end of the month. This is the rate of pay for the job. Now, this has been a traditional element in many pay systems throughout the history of modern organisations, so it shouldn't hold any confusion for us. There are other elements of the cash compensation package as well. The second element that we're going to think about is the way in which we provide people with increases to their rate of base pay. We don't just employ somebody on a rate of pay usually, and that rate of pay will exist for the entire length of that person's employment, unless it's a special kind of contract, like a short-term or a fixed-term contract, or unless somebody only stays with us for a relatively short period of time. We would normally want to build in some mechanism where somebody's base pay can increase over time, so that they've got some progression, they've got somewhere to go, they've got some kind of destination in terms of their rewards. It doesn't just stop with the levels of pay that they were employed on. Now, this usually would take one of two forms. It might be a simple system of, say, cost of living increases in pay, or sometimes called an incremental approach to increasing somebody's pay, so that we look at the changes in, say, in inflation rates or whatever it might be, and increase somebody's pay in order to keep track with that. We might also put in an incremental system which allows somebody's pay to increase each year according to how long they've been with the organisation, up to a certain maximum. Now, this might be seen as a way of rewarding someone's commitment, their loyalty to the organisation, the value that we place on someone's increased experience in the organisation. We might also take a different approach, and this is the merit pay approach. Merit pay systems are designed to reward people not for how long they stay with us in the organisation, but for how well they perform in their work. So we link our pay systems to performance appraisal systems. So we look at how somebody is performing in their job, and we link increases in their base pay to how well someone is performing. So if they're performing excellently, then they're going to get a significant pay increase. If they're performing at the average, then they'll get a smaller one. Maybe if they're not performing very well at all, they might not get any kind of increase in their base pay. And this is seen to direct people's behaviours towards higher levels of performance. We might also see various forms of incentives being included in cash compensation packages. Now, these incentive schemes usually are quite separate from base pay schemes. They're bonuses, if you like. They're lump sum payments. So they don't alter the fundamental rate of pay for the job. They don't lead to a consolidated increase in the amount of pay that is being provided for somebody's work. They may just reward somebody for a particular project or for a particular level of performance. They are a short-term, one-off bonus scheme. Longer-term incentives work in a slightly different way. Again, they're separated from base pay systems. They're not consolidated in the way that merit or cost of living or incremental schemes might be. But here, what we're incentivizing are much longer term issues, and the kinds of thing that we might associate with long-term incentive schemes might be share options, so that we give people options to buy shares in the organizations that they work for, and if the value of those shares increases over time, and that provides a financial incentive for people to help to grow the long-term health of the organization, to align an individual employee's financial interests with the financial interests of the firm. Now, we'll look at some of these in much more detail as we go through the module and think about these in terms of how we reward individual contribution to the success of the organisation. So we'll turn our attention from there to benefits. Now, employee benefits are a very important and very expensive part of a reward system. We've had lots of news over the last few years about the struggles that organisations are having in sustaining their pension schemes. And pension schemes probably form the most significant element of a benefits package. Now, the range of benefits can be extremely broad in reward systems, and to some extent the range of benefits are only limited by the limits on an employer's imagination, but they tend to fall into three broad categories. So we might have benefits that are associated with income protection. Now that might be a pension scheme, so that organisations are offering their employees not just income protection for periods of time when they're still employed by the organisation, but income protection for the periods when somebody is no longer employed by anybody, when they're retired, putting in provision for a very different period in an employee's life. However, income protection might take on a variety of different forms as well. It might be about sick pay schemes. It might be about enhanced maternity pay schemes. All of those kinds of situations where employees aren't able to earn their full amount of pay, that there is a system in place to protect their income so that they're not put in jeopardy in terms of their standard of living or their other commitments, and so on. So income protection, a key and probably the major form of employee benefits in cost terms that we might see in organisations. The second category of employee benefits are those connected with work-life balance. And what we're talking about here is about providing opportunities for flexibility, for providing patterns of work which meet the requirements of employees in terms of balancing their commitments between their work and their domestic lives, if you like. And again, this can take a variety of different forms, and again is only limited by the kinds of things that an employer would like to do or would like to agree with their employees. The final form of benefits are various allowances. So we might get allowances for shift work, for overtime. We might get allowances for work that is particularly unpleasant, dirty work, dangerous work. We might get allowances for certain expenses that we might incur because of our work, through travel allowances, mileage rates, allowances for our tools or protective clothing. Those kinds of things might all be lumped in to those kinds of systems of allowances. So a range of different approaches, different tools that are available, which make up the transactional returns on someone's employment. Now, we've just got the main categories here, and obviously the choices that are available to employees in relation to any one of these might run to dozens of individual ways of structuring the returns in each category. So there are an enormous variety of approaches, an enormous variety of forms of reward that employers might dip into in order to help to achieve the kinds of objectives that they have, in order to satisfy the kinds of things that their employees might require, the kinds of things that employers might need in order to make them sufficiently attractive in labour markets, in order to make sure that they get the best staff or the staff that they require. So lots of choices, simply in terms of the transactional returns on employment, the total compensation bits of the reward package. And these are the things that we're going to concentrate on within the module. We're going to just turn our attention briefly to relational returns, because although transactional returns are quite broad, contemporary approaches to reward as a whole have probably become much wider still over recent years, and we'll have a little look at what might be included in these relational aspects of the reward package. A lot of these aspects might typically have been considered as different parts of people management, human resource management at different points in time, but increasingly reward is seeking to kind of grab hold of these relational returns and see them as a relevant part of the reward package, something that is part of the entire reward mix that we offer to employees. They're not seen as something separate, something that might have been seen as part of a development strategy or some kind of commitment strategy. They're all part of the rewards, and so rewards as a tool of management is being ambitious. It's extending its reach, extending the range of tools that are available to it. So some of these things that we might see in these relational returns: recognition and status. Now, clearly this isn't a financial issue. This is about rewarding people in different ways, about telling them they've done a good job, about providing people with status value that isn't necessarily linked to a different financial return. It's simply about providing someone with a way of feeling good about themselves, and about that being recognised by the organisation. We might think about employment security as providing a distinctive type of reward for employees. Now, again, typically employment security might have been regarded as part of the employment relationship. Say it's about the extent to which people feel secure in their job, that they're not going to have to go and find something else, that they're not going to be facing the dole. Employment security, never really regarded as a reward, but increasingly the extent to which people are able to which organisations are able to offer employment security to their employees is seen as part of the overall mix, the overall forms of reward that are available to employees. Challenging work and learning opportunities. These are things that, again, might typically have been regarded as part of a training and development approach, training and development management tools. It's about providing people with stimulus, with abilities to learn and grow, to develop new skills. Now, that might have been seen as either just a way of providing some more interest at work, or it might have been seen as a distinctive approach to skill building and skill gap closing at work. But increasingly, because of the value of this kind of stimulation, these increased desires of an increasingly well-educated workforce, and how increased skills links to people's long-term career ambitions, we're increasingly seeing organisations using tools like the provision of challenging, stimulating work and learning opportunities, skill development, as something that provides benefits not just for the organisation, but something that provides a distinct reward for employees as well. So we take all of these elements together, the transactional returns and the relational returns, and we can regard this total return on employment as the scope of contemporary modern reward management. Now, we're going to focus on these green elements for the rest of the module. We'll be dealing with those relational returns in a variety of different contexts, and we've got quite enough on our plate to be focusing on the transactional element. So we're going to turn our attention to those now and start to think about these issues in a little bit more detail. Now, one of the key arguments in terms of reward management over recent years has been about how we focus our attention, how we make choices about what kinds of transactional returns, what kinds of rewards we should offer to our workforce. Now, part of that discussion is about how we make our rewards strategic, how we use our rewards to add value to the organisation, how our rewards allow the organization, enable the organization to achieve its strategic objectives, to achieve the kinds of things that are going to make a difference to the organization in competitive product markets. The second range of issues that organizations have been concerned with is how they make their reward packages attractive to employees. Now, part of that question has been to place an emphasis on matching rewards to the marketplace, and we'll be talking about this in some detail in a future session entitled Competitiveness. But one of the ways that organizations have sought to match their rewards to the desires of their employees has been not to think about matching rewards to the market more generally, but to seek to increasingly offer choice to individual employees. Now, traditionally, organizations have put together reward packages which have been offered on a kind of take it or leave it basis. This is our reward package. If you like it, maybe you'd like to come and work for us, and you can take all of the elements of the reward that we've made available to you. However, that kind of approach has come under considerable pressure from a number of different directions. Firstly, organizations began to be aware that not all of the elements of a reward package were being taken up by all employees. Some people use sick pay more than others. Some genders use maternity pay more than others. Some people desire holidays more than others. Some people would like maybe more cash pay at certain points in their life if they've got a young family, heavy levels of financial commitment in the early stages of their life through housing costs and so on, and cash pay for those might be more important than it might be for someone at a much later stage in their life with much fewer financial commitments. And so organizations began to be aware that maybe their reward systems weren't working as hard for them as they possibly could be. The second source of pressure in relation to this issue of choice in transactional returns came from the increasing diversification of organizations' workforces. If you go back to the 1950s and 1960s, you would find primarily in the UK labour market a white male workforce. And while there might have been a range of ages out there, this was often pre the growth of a distinctive youth culture, and so all of those white males might actually be wanting more or less the same kinds of things in terms of their rewards. It was a very kind of it was a real monoculture out in the workforce. Now, of course, we've seen a massive increase in diversity in the workforce that organisations seek to attract from the labour market. We've had a massive growth in women into the labour market. We've seen a massive increase in cultural diversity, with new demographic groups coming into the labour market and being recognised as being distinctive over the past 20 or 30 years. Now, that raises a challenge for organisations in a way that's associated with the concerns that organisations have had about not getting their reward packages to work hard enough. Because this increased diversity in the workforce also apparently comes with increased diversity in preferences in terms of rewards, in terms of what people expect from rewards. There has been research to indicate that women don't want the same things as men in terms of their rewards, that older people don't want the same things as younger people, that people with different levels of educational attainment don't want the same things as each other, that people from different ethnic groups and cultural backgrounds don't want the same things as each other. So this combination of pressures, organisations increasingly wanting to get an efficient use of their reward resources, and this increased diversity of the workforce with increasingly diverse preferences in terms of rewards has led to organisations starting to develop mechanisms whereby individuals can begin to choose preferences in terms of the reward package. Now, this has been particularly noticeable in terms of the benefit side of transactional returns. That whereas at one time there would be a range of benefits and you would have access to all of them, but you might only ever use 10% of them, now the organisations are increasingly offering a so-called cafeteria style of benefits schemes, where individuals can start to identify the kinds of benefits that they particularly value and maybe bump up the value of those. So if someone really benefits or really values increased holiday entitlement, then that might be something that they can do by reducing another area of benefit, or by maybe cashing in some of their base pay to buy themselves increased leave. So there's increasing choice being built into the benefit side. Now, there is an argument that that kind of approach might well be applied to the reward package as a whole. Now, this is perhaps a more radical approach, and certainly hasn't been tried on a large scale to my knowledge, but the same kinds of arguments might apply. There are risks that go along with offering increased choice to employees because of the fact they might choose poor decisions, and they may leave themselves exposed in ways that the organisation wouldn't want them to. And also it adds an enormous amount of complexity, and it adds an administrative burden into organisations. But there is a question as to whether or not this kind of approach might be applied more broadly to the reward system as a whole. So these are the forms of rewards that we've seen organisations make use of in broad terms. Now, over the course of the module, we'll flesh out these various elements. What we're going to do now is to start to concentrate on the strategic questions of reward, about how organisations make the broad decisions about the kinds of rewards that they want to offer to their employees, about the broad contours that their reward system should have. And so we need to start to think about how we make those decisions, what kind of reward system we want. So we need to narrow down this enormous range of choices, these enormous range of forms of reward to something much more manageable, and start to model our possible choices in a slightly more clear-cut way, in a way that clears out a lot of this complexity. So, going back to these ideas about transactional and relational aspects of rewards, we can think about the reward deal that we want to offer our employees by thinking about just how much emphasis we want to place on these various elements of reward. Now, it might be useful to think about these transactional and relational elements in terms of their motivational appeal. And say, for example, we might think of them in terms of Frederick Hertzberg's two-factor theory. Remember, he talked about hygiene factors and about motivators. And Hertzberg's hygiene factors were all about those kinds of transactional elements. He was talking about pay. And the motivators were these other elements, the things that we might associate with these relational aspects of rewards. So the way that we might want to focus our attention on thinking about the broad contours of the kind of reward deal that we might want to put together for our employees and our potential employees might be to think about the balance that we place between transactional elements and about relational elements. The kinds of things that are going to be about a financial return for somebody's effort and the kinds of things that are designed to generate people's commitment, their love for the organization. So if we think about, rating transactional elements as low to high and relational elements low to high, this provides us with a way of dividing up various approaches towards a reward deal, a broad reward strategy. So we might want to give very low pay. We might want to keep our costs down. We may want to make sure that we get as much squeezed out of our reward resources as we possibly can. So we provide low transactional rewards. It may also be that at the same time we really don't care too much about whether our employees love us or not, that whether they have any kind of commitment to us. And so we may decide that we have low relational rewards as well. Now, this kind of low pay, low commitment strategy is something that we see organizations doing quite commonly. Often if organizations have got a very short-term emphasis, or if organizations are operating on very low margins, they're trying to recruit from very slack labour markets. They know they've got a lot of choice. They don't need high levels of skill. They don't need high levels of commitment. They know that the kinds of employees that they need are very widely available, or that those employees are really desperate, and so they can get away with low pay, and they don't care if they only stay for a week or a month or a year, because they're easily replaced. They're not needing high levels of training to get somebody in. They can just slot a replacement right back in there. These types of strategies see workers as a commodity. They're a simple part of the production process, and we're not required to pay them high wages because they're scarce. We're not prepared to place a lot of emphasis on high relational returns because we don't care if they leave tomorrow. And so this might be one approach that works for some organizations, whatever our feelings might be about the ethics of such an approach. At the opposite end of both scales, we might see a high pay, high commitment strategy. So high on relational returns, high on transactional returns. Now again, organizations that are using this kind of strategy are probably operating a very different kind of business strategy that suits or requires these kinds of approaches. The fact that you've got a high transactional level of return there indicates that the kind of labour market that this type of organisation is operating in would be much tighter. This isn't a slack labour market. They may be extremely competitive, the labour markets that organisations like this are operating in. They're looking for particular types of employees, maybe with scarce skills, maybe operating against fierce competition for the same kinds of employees. So high levels of pay might be required in order to attract and retain the kind of employees that you really need for your particular types of objectives. And in order to make sure that those people remain with you, that they stay with you, that they continue to add value to the organisation, that they work beyond job description, that they are innovative, that we really get people who are prepared to go the extra mile. We also emphasise relational aspects as well, that these are not people that we're just paying in a kind of mercenary way, but if they get a better offer from somebody else, they'll go to them because, well, why wouldn't they? That would make sense. This is also about making sure that we that our employees know that we value them, that we provide them with all kinds of things that speak to other psychological and social needs, so that we develop loyalty and we develop longevity, that we develop high levels of commitment amongst the employees for long-term benefits. The third version of reward deals that we might think about is a high pay, low commitment model. Now, a high pay, low commitment model shares features of both of these previous strategies. We're going for high pay, high transactional returns. So that says something about the kind of labour market that we're recruiting from. But it's also gone for low relational returns, low commitment model. Here we don't really care too much how long people stay with us. We know that people are not going to stay with us for a long period of time. A typical example of this high pay, low commitment type of approach might be the kind of people that we see working in financial centres in the City of London, in the stock exchanges, stockbrokers. You know, they earn enormous amounts of money, and a lot is expected of them for those financial returns. But there's kind of an expectation, a kind of assumption that the level of effort, the level of performance that's required in those kinds of jobs leads to a significant level of early burnout, that people don't continue doing this for their entire career. They come in young, hungry, earn a lot of money early, work in very long hours, and at some point, maybe when they want to start a family, maybe when they want to emphasize some other aspects of their life, they go and do something else. And so people don't stay in that industry, typically, for a long period of time. Now, in that context, it makes no sense to emphasize high levels of relational returns, because we know that people are not going to stay anywhere because of the nature of the work. So high pay, low commitment might make sense in that kind of environment. The final version of these reward deals is a low pay, high commitment model. Now, low pay, again, tells us something about the kind of labour market, about the kinds of employees that we want. And we might typically see this in retail. Now, retail typically recruits on fairly low levels of skill. And so those levels of skill are not going to command high rates of pay. There are lots of people who can do that, lots of people who have the kinds of skills that are required. At the same time, in those kinds of environments where we've got, well, primarily people are customer facing. We don't want people who are going to come in and are going to exhibit our company to its customers with a sigh and with disgruntlement and unhappiness and all of those kinds of features. So although we're paying low, we actually want people to feel committed to our organisation. We want them to feel like they're part of the family, like they've got a stake in the organisation. And so we might emphasise the way that we treat those employees. We may not be able to offer high pay, even if we wanted to, because of relatively low margins in some of these industries. But what we can do is to make sure that we provide people with the kinds of relational returns that will engender higher levels of commitment, and therefore make sure that they meet our customers with a happy face, with a sense of commitment to the organisation that they work for. And that breeds the kinds of performance success that we would like in that type of industry, though it's very important that we present a particular view of the organisation to its customers. And where a very high proportion of the workforce is customer facing, then we need to make sure that those people are committed, and that's obvious to the public. So this provides us with a way to start to think about the kinds of reward deals that might make sense for us in our organisation, or that might make sense for us in different parts of our organisation, because obviously organisations are quite diverse. Sometimes in organisations there are a variety of job families doing quite different things from each other, and that for some parts of the workforce we might want a particular reward deal, and in other parts of the organisation might want a very different type of reward deal, because of the nature of the workforce and because of the nature of the things that they do and the way that we want them to work. Another way of thinking about these strategic choices is to start thinking about the nature of business strategies. Now, there are two ways that we can think about this, well, there are a number of ways that we can think about this, but two ways that we're going to talk about here today. The first is to start thinking about so-called ideal type strategies. Now, this provides us with a way of defining broad types of strategic responses that organizations make towards their market. Now, once we've decided the kinds of strategy that our organization might employ, we can then identify what it is that the organization needs to do in order to follow through with that strategy, what that requires in terms of its people management strategies, its HR alignment, and because rewards are part of that people management process, how we build that into reward or compensation strategies in line with that. The second approach to this kind of strategic thinking that we're going to talk about today, which we'll deal with in a moment, is to narrow that down a little bit more. Rather than to think about these broad ideal type strategies, we might start to think about the specific strategy that an organization is trying to employ. What particular approaches to the market is this organization going to employ in order to achieve its objectives, and to build that through into business responses, HR alignment, reward strategies, and so on. So we'll think about these broad ideal type strategies first, and think about how far that might get us. So the first of these ideal type strategies is the so-called innovator strategy. Now, this is the kind of strategy that we've seen many very successful organizations employ, particularly in high-tech organizations. We think about an organization like Apple. Now, they are a typical innovator, continually increasing product complexity, the abilities that their products have, the way in which their development process is about producing products that can do amazing things, capture the imagination of the marketplace, to create new markets where markets didn't exist at all, and then to kill them and replace them with something else. So we see this on an ongoing basis, particularly if we use the example of Apple again, through the development of the original iPods, through to video iPods and killing off previous versions, then the introduction of iPod Touch, iPhone, and starting to kill off the earlier versions that had preceded them. So that constant process of building the new, developing a market for those kinds of products, and destroying previous offerings to the market, continually innovating and increasing demand for its products that way. Now, in order to be successful with a strategy like this, then there are certain things that the business needs to be able to do. It needs to have product leadership. It needs to be desirable. It needs to be the product, or to be the producer of the product that is desired above all others. It's about the business being able to operationalize this innovation process, to be able to deliver what look like niche products to a mass market, to undertake this so-called mass customization, and to be able to develop a business model and a model of operation which is capable of this continual cycle of reinvention within the product line. So that's quite ambitious. What kinds of human requirements are there to enable that kind of business response to take place? Well, you need certain types of people to do that kind of activity. We need people who are agile. We need people who are risk-taking. I mean, it's obvious, but we need innovative people, people who are able to think beyond what is currently there. And if you think again about the example of Apple that I'm talking about, and you think about risk-taking people, well, the original iMacs were the first computer effectively to get rid of a floppy disk drive. If you think about the development of an iPod as the first really successful MP3 player, about the entrance into the mobile phone market with the iPhone, which the computer industry and the mobile phone industry said would be a disaster because the organisation had no record of success in those areas. So risk taking is very important. That psychological ability to say, well, we're going to do it, we're going to try it, we're going to make it work, to take those risks, to build new markets, to introduce products that nobody else has introduced, to be innovative, to actually have the skills to put in place these fantastic new things, to have design genius like Jonathan Ive at the core of the operation, and to have the ability to put these products in the pipeline. So there are certain requirements for an organisation that wants to deliver a strategy like this to have. It's not something that you can just choose to do. You actually have to have certain things in place. And one of the most important things are the kinds of people that can deliver that strategy. So what other strategies might we see? Well, the cost cut strategy, one that I talked about earlier when we were talking about a low pay, low commitment reward deal. Here, the focus is completely different from the innovator strategy. A cost cutter is really only interested in one thing, and that's the bottom line. It's about maximizing what will probably be a wafer thin margin. You're often, as a cost cutter, operating in highly competitive markets, often competing against strong competitors, and so you need to pare down your operation in order to allow you to focus entirely on efficiency, about getting the most that you possibly can out of your resources. And so operational excellence is a key feature of the business response to this strategy, about making sure that you can identify and pursue cost-effective solutions. And the people requirements are all about doing more with less. Now, whether that's labour intensification, whether it's just more productive and more efficient ways of working, however we want to characterise it, that is the key feature of a cost cutter strategy and the people requirements of a cost cutter strategy. The third ideal type strategy is a customer focused strategy. Now here what we're doing, rather than there are similarities between the customer focused strategy and the innovative strategy, but here the lead is taken very much by the customer. The organisation focuses on what its customers are telling them, whereas an innovator thinks, I know what they want, or I know there will be a market for this if I invent it. A customer-focused approach listens to the customer and tries to deliver what it is that the customer wants. And so the business response to this kind of strategy is all about being close to customers. It's about knowing your customers well. It's about providing speed to market. You know, if we think about this kind of approach in the real world, we might think about high street fashion retail. We think about the success of organizations like Zara, who very much follow this kind of customer focused approach. They look at what has gone down well in the fashion shows, in the haute couture market, and their desire is to get those successful products which customers are demanding, who are being wowed by, you know, the latest lines from the haute couture labels, to deliver those solutions to customers in a rapid time, to get them to market quick. And Zara's success, and the reason why Zara and labels like Primark and some of the others were able to overtake more established fashion retailers like Marks and Spencer's, was because of their ability to get these products to market very quickly, to have very finely tuned antennae who could see what was coming through, what customers were wanting, and to get them there fast. So the HR alignment for this kind of strategy is about delighting the customer, about exceeding their expectations. That's what we want from our people, from this kind of strategic approach. Now, the big question for us here, in terms of our interest in reward or compensation systems, is what do these strategies mean for the decisions that we take in terms of the design of our reward systems? Does it matter? Can we have a single reward system that will deliver across all of these strategies? Or is it rather the case that if we want in very different things from our people, sometimes wanting very different people for our organizations, depending on the kind of strategy that we want to employ, does that mean that we should be putting in place very different kinds of reward systems in order to get the kinds of people that we want, and in order to get the kinds of people that we've got doing the kinds of things that we want them to do in order to meet our strategic objectives? So let's think through what kinds of implications there might be for compensation systems across each of these ideal type strategies. So if we're an innovator, what do we want? Well, we want agile, risk-taking, innovative people. So it's not rocket science. If we want innovation, then we reward innovation. We encourage financially people who are able to bring forward new, exciting, groundbreaking products and processes. You know, if we want a particular type of behavior from our employees, then we reward it. Then we provide that carrot for someone to jump towards. In some ways, that's not so very different from the kind of thing that Frederick Taylor was talking about 100 years ago when he was talking about trying to make the pig iron workers work faster. If you want somebody to do something in a certain way, then you reward them for it. So if innovation is your desire, if innovation is what you need, then reward it. Don't reward some other things, reward the thing that you're interested in. It's not as simple as that, though. I mean, there are some other elements that we might think about in the compensation systems to get this kind of thing. If we are wanting particular types of people, risk-taking, agile, innovative people, you know, they are sometimes some of the hardest people to find in the tightest labour markets. And so we would need to pay very close attention to our rates of pay to make sure that we are competitive, that we are able to compete with the people, with the other organisations in our product markets, to make sure that we get the best, we get the pick, we get the cream of the crop, the people who are going to come in with the best ideas, with the best solutions, the people who are going to be able to break ground. It's not just about rewarding innovation and targeting incentives in these kinds of way, but about making sure that you get access to the kind of people who've got the basic skill and competence set to do the things that you need them to do. The final element that's up here, and these are only a selection of things that we can do, but the final element is about flexibility. If we want people to innovate and take risks, and we want people to be agile, then the last thing that we want to do is to stick somebody in a little box. Sometimes in organisations, if you think about an organisation like McDonald's, McDonald's is it's a cost cutter. It's the very opposite of an innovator strategy. If you work at McDonald's, then you work to a very tightly defined job description. And if you go into a McDonald's in Newcastle, then and ask for a Big Mac, it will be made exactly the same way there as it would in any other McDonald's in the world. give or take. We want different things from our innovator organisations. We want people to do things differently, to take risks, to try out new ways, to do new things. And so we want the very opposite of a tightly defined job description. We want to just give people the choice to do things in a very loosely structured way, because it's out of that looseness and freedom that the innovation is going to emerge. So we need to be very careful in the design of our compensation systems that we don't hem people in and squeeze innovation out of our organisation. So, by contrast, compensation systems for our cost cutter strategy are very different indeed. We need to take close account of what our competitors are doing in terms of their labour costs. Because a cost cutter will typically be working on very small margins and wanting to get as much out of their margins as they possibly can, then their prices and their profit will be driven by what their labour costs are, and their ability to compete in that kind of product market will be driven by ostensibly their competitors' labour costs. So we need to keep a very careful eye and make sure that our competitors' labour costs don't drop below ours, because that will mean we can be undercut, and we may not just lose our margin, we may lose our market as well. So focus on competitors' labour costs is very important. We also might want to make sure that we make use of reward elements that don't add a long-term cost burden on the organisation. Base pay is fixed. That's what you get as a floor in terms of your take-home pay. Now that, for a cost cutter, places quite a considerable burden on the organisation's cost structure as a whole. If, however, you design a reward system which has a much greater proportion of rewards that are variable, that can go up and down depending on profit, on performance, on some other measure of organisational or individual activity, then that cost becomes variable as well. And that if someone doesn't perform, or if we don't make the profits, then our our labour costs can decrease in order to absorb some of those difficulties as well. So, you know, from an organisational point of view, that might be quite attractive. From an employee point of view, maybe not so much, but variable pay for a cost cutter is a very valuable tool. In terms of what we reward, obviously productivity is a big issue here. We're talking about increased output, labour intensification, and productivity is a very important part of the process. Customer-focused strategy again provides us with different types of needs. Here, the main issue was about customer delight, about customer intimacy. And so, again, not rocket science. If those are the things that we need, then those are the things that we reward. We incentivize people who deliver customer satisfaction. We make our performance benchmarks all about customer satisfaction. We value those jobs that provide the interface between our organisation and the customers, because that's where the value comes. We reward the skills that are associated with customer contact, because those are the things that are going to make our organisation successful. It's simple, it's straightforward, it's not rocket science by any stretch of the imagination. We simply have to make sure that we think through what kind of strategy is this organisation running? What does that mean in terms of how it's going to operate? What are the implications of that for the kind of people that we want and the kind of things that we need our people to do? And how can we use our reward systems to get people to behave in ways that are consistent with that? You know, it's a simple, logical process of thinking that through and then finding the reward tools that allow us to do that kind of thing.